What if Abraham never left Ur? Would history be rewritten? Picture a moonlit city of baked brick and bright stars. The ziggurat of Ur climbs the night like a stone mountain. Merchants tie their camels. A young man stands at the edge of the city gate, hand on the tether, heart pulled between a familiar skyline and a voice that whispers, "Go." Now imagine he stays. He drops the rope. He turns back into the warm glow of home. If Abraham never left Ur, how many threads in history would suddenly loosen and how many would snap? Before we step into that alternate path, let's walk the road everyone knows. The story begins with a call. Abram, later named Abraham, hears a command. Leave your country, your people, your father's house, and go to a land I will show you. He goes, from Ur toward Haran, and then on into Canaan. There, under a sky that seems close enough to touch, a promise takes shape. Descendants as numerous as the stars. A land. A blessing that will reach the families of the earth. It unfolds slowly. There are droughts and detours. There's a son promised against the calendar's math. There's a covenant, sealed with a new name and a new sign. Isaac is born. Isaac's son Jacob is named Israel. Israel's sons become tribes. Famine pushes them into Egypt, where survival turns into servitude. Centuries later, Moses leads them out, through a sea that parts, to a mountain where law and identity are carved into a people. After wilderness wandering, they settle. A shepherd named David becomes king. Jerusalem becomes a capital, then a symbol, then a heartbeat. There's a temple, songs and psalms, wisdom and prophets. The people rise and break, fall and return, carrying their scriptures like a portable homeland through exile. The story spills forward into empires and centuries, shaping ethics, language, calendars, and the spiritual maps of billions. That's the well-worn arc, a call, a journey, a nation, a library of faith that keeps whispering into human rooms and human decisions. Now softly, let's turn the page and ask the forbidden question. What if he never went? We start at the same city gate. Ur is not a desert outpost. It is a humming center of trade and astronomy, worship and law. The god of the moon is honored on the towering ziggurat. Households are large and layered with duty. If Abram stays, he likely marries within his city's networks, invests in his father's house, and becomes a respected figure in a culture already ancient. He grows old beneath the steady pattern of lunar festivals and river seasons. The first ripple is geographical. No caravan cuts a new trail into Canaan carrying a fragile promise. Haran remains a waypoint, not a hinge. The southern hills of Canaan never know the footsteps of a small clan pitching tents, building altars, and sketching invisible borders with prayers. Without that seedling, the field changes. The highlands of Canaan remain primarily a patchwork of city-states and local tribes. They still fight and trade, still marry and make treaties. But one storyline, the one bound to Abraham's tent, never roots. From geography, the second ripple moves into identity. Without Abraham's migration, there is no family called Israel gathering around a shared call and a shared covenant. No tribes descend from Jacob, because Jacob does not exist in that way. The Exodus, as told, is not a national memory, but perhaps a footnote of laborers moving, as laborers always do, in the tides of empire. The mountain of law, the wilderness of testing, the sense of being shaped into a people with a distinct ethic. These do not coalesce under Moses, because there is no Moses in this line. The ethical vocabulary we associate with a people who tell their story in terms of liberation, covenant, and justice would have to find another cradle, or it would arrive much later, and from a different voice. What happens to Jerusalem? Without David, a shepherd who becomes a poet king, there is no Davidic city crowned by a temple as the spiritual pulse of a nation. Jerusalem may remain a hilltop stronghold of a local tribe, or a strategic outpost contested by larger powers. Its name might still be known. Cities endure because geography is stubborn, but it would lack the concentrated weight of poetry, liturgy, and longing that made it more than stone. No psalms pouring through its gates, no prophetic oracles pinning hope to its walls. Just a city, important perhaps, but not the compass rose of a people's prayer. The ripple reaches literature next. Without the house of David and the temple, the Psalms as we know them. Songs that taught the world to grieve, to praise, to protest with reverence, might not be written, or might be written by a different community with a different melody. Wisdom literature might still blossom. Human beings have always sought insight, but it would carry other names, other idioms. Imagine the global bookshelf without those specific cadences. Imagine funerals and celebrations, revolutions and quiet nights, without those exact lines shaping the room. And what of the idea at the story's center? One God over all, unseen but near, ethical and personal, asking not just ritual, but justice, mercy, humility. Monotheism does not have only one hallway in history. In neighboring cultures, you can see doors that could have opened. Philosophers debated unity. Reformers pushed against idols. Even in Egypt, a pharaoh once exalted a solitary son. But the particular arc of ethical monotheism that took root in a family and grew into a people, cultivated by wilderness, sharpened by prophets, guarded in exile, would be missing this early, enduring example. Without Abraham's move, any ascent to that kind of faith might arrive more slowly, more abstractly, or through a different community's drama. Zoom out to the broader map of antiquity. The empires still rise. Assyria marches, Babylon builds, Persia administers, Greece philosophizes, Rome engineers. But in this timeline, none of them are made to reckon with a stubborn little nation insisting that law stands above kings, that slavery is not the end of a story, that widows, strangers, and orphans are metrics of national health. When Babylon relocates populations, there is no exiled choir along its rivers composing hope in minor keys. When Persia sends peoples home, there is no rebuilding project in a city that will break the hearts of prophets. The chorus is thinner. The moral arguments of empire face different opponents, or perhaps none at all with that precise vocabulary. Across the Mediterranean, the Greco-Roman world still forms. Roads still tie cities. Ideas still travel faster than caravans ever could. But without the deep library of a people forged by covenant and criticism, the world's conversation about conscience and law tilts. Some themes still surface, because humans keep rediscovering them. But the accelerant is gone. The 7-day rhythm, seated in ancient calendars but sanctified as rest, may remain a technical cycle rather than a social safeguard. The concept of a weekly cessation designed to dignify labor might emerge elsewhere, later, or not at all in the same protective form. It sounds small until you picture your week without a cultural backbone that insists on stopping. Art bends too. No David, no temple, no psalms, no centuries of artists in distant lands looking back at those images for inspiration. Painters find other muses. Sculptors chisel different heroes. The gallery of the world still fills, but certain wings are empty or rearranged. Place names shift. Festivals fade before they form. The calendar thins where it would have been thick with memory. We also need to speak carefully about faiths that later trace lines back to Abraham. This is a respectful thought experiment, not a doctrinal claim. In this alternate timeline, the streams we call Abrahamic would still seek their headwaters, because the human thirst for meaning and the sense of the divine do not vanish when a man stays home. But the banks would be different. The stories that give people a shared ancestor, a shared promise, a shared map, those stories would find other anchors or arrive in other centuries. Spiritual ideas that branched from a trunk called Abraham might bud from different trees, in different soils, with new seasons and shapes. In everyday life, families feel it. Names change. You don't hear Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob in as many households. If you listen for lullabies, they're sung from different pages. If you open a child's reader centuries later, the heroes have different faces. In courts of law, phrases that once came from ancient codes shaped by wilderness meetings are absent. The vocabulary of covenant, exile, return, words that teach people to be faithful across long winters, would have to be learned from other experiences, if learned at all. Economics doesn't escape the ripple. The idea that gleaning fields should be left for the poor, that social generosity is structured, not improvised, was part of a specific tradition. Maybe another society writes that into law, because human empathy appears everywhere. But maybe it doesn't, or it appears later, and 1,000 hungry days exist that otherwise might have been softened. As centuries roll, Empire after empire stacks stone upon stone over the same contested lands. Without a people rooted by Abraham's tent, those hills are still strategic, but less symbolically charged. Pilgrims still walk, but to different shrines. The road network is busy, but the stories told along it shift their center of gravity. A city that would have been a spiritual capital is instead a regional depot. Peace may come easier for a time, or conflict may simply relocate, because human rivalries are not cured by editing one chapter. Still, the intensity surrounding certain sites is changed, and with it a long trail of wars, treaties, and quiet hopes. Now, let's return to Ur, where a man stayed. His life could still be remarkable. He might become a reformer within his city, advocating kindness in contracts, generosity in harvest, dignity in family. He might rough the edges off idols, turning his home into a refuge for seekers who ask bigger questions than the shrine can answer. He might be remembered as a wise elder who taught that a single maker designed the skies he measured every night. The spark is present. The difference is not whether goodness exists, but where it takes its most visible shape. And if you pan even farther out, you can watch civilization itself adjust, slightly at first, then significantly, as a guiding story is missing. The notion that history arcs toward justice is not absent, but it limps where it once ran. Certain movements, abolition, reform, rights for the invisible, eventually rise, because humans are image bearers of a moral sense that won't die. Yet the early language of those movements loses a well of phrases that once gave courage to stand and to keep standing. Halfway through this alternate journey, pause with me. Which ripple surprised you most? The idea of a world without Jerusalem's psalms, or the notion of a week without a protected day of rest? Tell me in the comments. And if this kind of careful what-if storytelling helps you see history with new eyes, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter. Let's keep going. Consider the diaspora. In our familiar timeline, exile does not erase identity, it refines it. Scattered communities build synagogues, schools, and systems of memory. They turn portable practices into anchors, prayer, study, charity, that let them be at home while away. In the alternate world, this kind of diaspora forms differently, if at all. Other peoples experience displacement. This is a very human story. But the particular way of preserving identity through text, time, and table may not come together in the same combination. Without that model, later cultures may be slower to develop durable methods for retaining identity in exile. The world might be poorer in one of humanity's most beautiful inventions, a community held together by words and rituals rather than walls. Education shifts too. So much of the world's learning systems took cues, sometimes directly, sometimes by echo, from communities that treasured reading sacred texts aloud, asking questions around a table, and debating meaning as a form of devotion. If those practices are diminished or delayed, literacy's spread changes shape. The classroom still blossoms, but some of its earliest flowerings bloom in different fields, at different times, with different colors. Listen to languages. Without the particular Hebrew scriptures, later languages miss the phrases, idioms, and moral proverbs that shaped how people speak about right and wrong. Translations that taught generations to weigh words like justice, mercy, steadfast love, and repentance would not exist in the same body. Those concepts might surface in other tongues, but the specific sound and feel that ran like a current through poetry, theater, and law would be altered. Yet even as we trace these losses and swaps, we find something unexpectedly hopeful. The ache that vibrates under the Abraham story. The ache to know who calls us, to answer, to build something larger than a house with a door, doesn't rely on one man's feet. It's written into human longing. In Ur or Canaan, in city or desert, people keep hearing that quiet tug. Some step out, some stay, and transform what's around them. History is filled with both kinds of courage. So, would the world be unrecognizable? Not exactly. Rivers still flow. Empires still rise and fall. Children still laugh when a goat sneezes. But a great deal shifts in tone, texture, and timing. Compassion may arrive later to certain corners. Law may argue with power in a different register. Art may console us with other songs. The moral imagination of billions might be tuned a half-key differently, changing the chords we find beautiful and the silences we accept. And there's a final quiet thought. The beauty of the Abraham story isn't only that he goes, it's that the going was aimed at blessing, the kind that overflows. Even in our alternate world where he stays, we can imagine that intention landing somewhere else, or later, through other hands. If a story is meant to bless the families of the earth, it hunts for a root. Maybe that's the steadying note here. Paths change, purposes persist. This has been a respectful, imaginative exercise, not a sermon. It's a way of noticing how interwoven our histories are. How a decision at a city gate can echo in the calendar on your kitchen wall, the lullaby your grandmother sang, the words in your wedding vows. Abraham's yes to the unknown became a road many walked after him. His no would have redrawn the map, but the human search for meaning would have kept tracing lines across the world until it found its way. So we close where we began, a man at a gate under a sky full of stars. In one world, he walks into the dark and teaches us to trust. In another, he turns back and reminds us that faith can also take root at home. Either way, the night is honest, the stars are many, and the choice, go or stay, will always matter. Because history listens when hearts answer a call.